we are not supposed to be confusing conflict with abuse.
That's to be said. That is really to be said. Because
Yes.
at some point, there are people who stay on in a relationship, not even recognizing that what they think is conflict is actually something more serious, as you mentioned, abuse.
Conflict is natural. Abuse is not. Right? Imperfections in a human being are to be forgiven. That's wisdom. That's being wise. That's arriving at maturity. But then, behavior patterns are to be treated, are to be broken.
Sunita, on today's episode of Emotional First Aid Show, we are in a good place to talk about something which is very crucial: relationships and conflict. No matter how good a partnership, things fall apart, whether in the bedroom or the boardroom. Now, conflicts, therefore, seem unavoidable. How do you resolve a conflict or even avoid a conflict?
Vasanthi, we are brought up in a culture that has ingrained into us that conflicts are essentially bad. This whole need of wanting to avoid conflict in the most crucial experiences of life, whether it's in the bedroom, whether it's in the boardroom, between team members or even your intimate partners, this need to avoid conflicts, as something that is bad, is culturally ingrained into us. But look at nature. Right? A seed goes through a conflict with the soil to come out and show its full potential as a plant. The clouds get into conflict and pours down as rain. The child in the womb goes through a conflict with mother and then stems out into a new venture called life. If you look at nature, you know how conflict is ingrained. To put it in other words, conflict is also the birthplace of growth. It's also the birthplace of evolution. It's a birthplace of breakthroughs. When we have disagreements, let us say this particular room has to be arranged in a particular way. There are disagreements that's bound to happen. But then it is that disagreement that would give us the best result, the best outcome that can help progression, right? So if the son or the daughter of the caveman didn't have conflict with their father or the ancestors, then we wouldn't have what is called a civilization today.
We wouldn't be where we are.
We wouldn't be where we are. So what we need to understand is that, conflicts happen when something that's very important for me is threatened by another person who's also important for me. So now it is idea versus my life's most important part, right? So let us say I'm fighting for the idea of loyalty in relationship and I'm questioning the other person. This is the importance I give for loyalty in this equation. Where do you stand? It could be at workplace. This is the commitment and commitment is important for me. Go out there into the ring, fight it out. We've come from an agricultural civilization where we're very comfortable screaming, saying, "Hey, Ramanna, Ellidia," right? So we don't have to cut that short because we are, in this entire belief system that believes that, conflicts are bad. Or if I'm going to bring up conflict, I'm a bad person.
So if conflicts, or if we stop treating conflicts as villains, then we look at it as a very integral part of the relationship itself.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, if we had to draw this into conflict between couples, or at least couples who think they are in conflict, this would change the entire dynamics of it.
Yes. Because you see, earlier, you need to, if you look at couples who have survived 10 years or 20 years, and if you sit and speak with them, initially their language would be very different from the language that they have after having spent 10 or 20 years together. Your conflict would have started like, "You're not giving enough time for me." And today they would be speaking about, probably this is not how you should have spoken to your son or daughter. Probably if it was me, I would have dealt it in a very different way. The conflict matures with the relationship.
And the person who's viewing it
Yes.
has the advantage of maturity, age, and experience.
Yes, that's the fruit, right? That's a fruit of conflict.
There is a conflict that you mention in close relationships, in relationships that inherently foster love, where there is a need to, or at least an attempt to make up. And then there is an industry that I come from,
Yes.
where conflict is the necessary ingredient for it to survive.
Yes, you should tell me about your experience, in the newsroom. What is it like?
Conflict,
I mean, do
Sunita,
you
is-
walk in thinking, okay, we're going to have conflict now, and
Yeah, come on,
what's
let's
your
come up
experience
with
like?
I have been part of conversations in newsrooms, or at least overheard friends in the media, colleagues speaking, saying that, "Yaar, kuch to masala ho," and that masala is conflict. It can't be that today, Sunita, you and I are, let's say, media people, have a public program and not have a conflict. Because that conflict then leads to something so essential called the TRP. Who wants to watch two peaceful people chatting? We want them fighting at each other's neck. We want them hurling abuses. We want things to go viral. We want it to be as terrible, as filled with discord and vicious conversations that make it compelling, or at least people in the industry think that's what sells. Conflict sells, Sunita.
Right.
It wasn't this way when I started off. 2 decades back in the media space, we could still have a decent, dignified discussion. Now, no longer. Now, what happens though is that the people who are programming this, quite, the pun is intended, will just probably laugh it off and next have a biryani together. But you who are watching it will sow those seeds of that conflict in your relationships, ideologies. And then things will fall apart. Society gets polarized. You know what I'm saying? This conflict where it started off as something that's going to help me sell my program leads to a fracture in society.
I hear you, Vasanthi. And I think, I'm not going to sit here and comment on media, but what I would also like to draw the attention on is, conflict is all about getting the other person's attention to my needs. Whether we are doing it in the newsroom, whether we are doing it in a boardroom, whether we are doing it, in an intimate relationship, we bring about conflict and catch the other person, may or may not hurl abuses, but, catch hold of the other person. What I'm asking of you is your attention. And if you look deep down, in my own counseling sessions, I see a person who is triggering conflict. You have the wife who tells you that I have been silent for so many years, I can't do it anymore. And now I have to get this resolved. Hey, sit down, and I'm pinning you down and telling you, I want you to address this. I want you accountable in this particular thing. And then you have the other person who is also conflict driven and is arguing because, hey, you know what? I have been arguing all these years, so I'm continuing to do it because it's a habit for me. But if you look at all these, what we would like to call as ugly conversations and confrontations, it all boils down to the fact, again, a belief that each one of us, our grandmothers, our aunts, our mothers, have lovingly ingrained into us that if you are nice to people, then people will be nice to you. Nice things will happen to you. And then I get into the adult world and understand that not necessarily.
Not necessary at all.
Not necessarily.
But how important it is to think of conflict as an essential part, as you have been explaining, and then to have some kind of a mature resolving of that.
Vasanthi, you would have often heard people say, choose your battles wisely. Now, these are the people who have really gone and, burnt, they're scarred, and they have learned their lessons the hard way, that today they are in a place where they can look at things and say, I'm going to choose my battles. I'm going to decide where I'm going to spend my energy on and work it through. Now, some of them can do it immediately. There are others who had to wait for the right opportunity. It could be children had to grow up, or there's an elderly person who's ailing. But that kind of a wisdom, if it has to start, right? It's very easy when you are a 65-year-old, like your aunt said, everything will fall into place. Just the most favorite word in India, adjust kar lo. So, at 60th floor, the view is very different. And having seen life for such a long time, and then now that I can see the sunset much more clearly, right? I'm closer to the beauty of life than the traffic that's in the 5th floor. So, to have that understanding that at 35th floor, I would never understand what the view is of a 60-year-old. I can listen, I can anticipate, okay, maybe when I'm 60, I will be able to say the same words that the other person is saying. It'll all make sense. But today, if it feels like manipulation to me, right? The question that I need to ask myself is, hey, will I stand up for this idea? Whatever it is about, it could be about, the everyday lifestyle things that happen in families. Can I just pause and ask myself, will I stand up for this idea, this value, even if I have nothing to gain from it?
See, when it comes to choosing a battle, which means to say that there were a few battles and then you made a choice. I'm going to bring up the battle that was not chosen. Because I choose to stay silent about that battle doesn't mean to say that my mind has gone calm. It is still in conflict internally. Right. You are, let's say, my husband, or you are my business colleague, partner. I may have chosen to bring this up while letting all the others simmer.
Right.
But the others which have not come up to this point, right? Now, they will at some point of time, they're going to burst and create that or add to the conflict. Which is why, is it important somewhere to, rather than be the non-speaking partner or the one who's not bringing it up at that point of time, just for the sake of, it's going to create such unpleasantness. Is it necessary to set boundaries within that relationship, whatever it may be?
Absolutely. I think it's very important that we set boundaries, and the sooner we set these boundaries, it is like letting the other person know how they are supposed to be treating you. Okay, but to think that someone who's silent and letting a conflict pass by is more evolved than the other person who's hanging on to that particular event that happened, that argument that happened, and keeps bringing it up again and again. I think it would be very square-headed to just say that, that person is just, nagging for no rhyme or reason. Because, you see, there's only two ways that you can live your life, right? You can either go at conflict with the world, but arrive at peace within yourself, or you can tear yourself apart and arrive at peace with the world. But maturity is to know that, I have to pick and choose my battles because it has to make sense to me at the end of the day, right?
That's
Irrespective
important.
of whatever is the role that I'm playing, of a wife, daughter, husband, business, employee, owner, whatever it is. At the end of the day, it has to make sense to me. So if it makes sense to me that, I can go fight the world out, but at the end of the day, I'm at peace with myself, You would hear people say, right? I would rather be, hated for who I am than be loved for who I'm not. So yes. But for most people, conflict can go to an extreme, especially in intimate relationship.
Yeah.
And, it can take forms of ugly abuse, right? So your question about boundary, where do I draw a line? So what we need to understand is this, Vasanthi, we are not supposed to be confusing conflict with abuse.
That's to be said. That is really to be said. Because
yes,
at some point, there are people who stay on in a relationship, not even recognizing that what they think is conflict is actually something more serious, right. as you mentioned, abuse.
Right. Conflict is natural. Abuse is not. Right? Imperfections in a human being are to be forgiven. That's wisdom That's being wise. That's arriving at maturity. But then behavior patterns are to be treated, are to be broken.
When does a person therefore recognize that this is abuse? It's not just conflict.
If you look at, IPV, intimate partner violence, one person in the equation could be suffering from ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or they could be suffering from personality disorders, because of which on an impulse, I'm beating or I'm acting on my emotions. Or it could be alcoholism. It could be substance abuse,
Right.
where I have this, obsessive compulsive need to go and keep shopping or keep going on accumulating credit cards. Now, these are all things that are not natural, right? That has got nothing to do with the other person, where, the role of forgiveness and gratitude and the larger way of looking at life needs to be addressed. But this is more at a very functional level, where your safety is threatened, where your self-respect and self-worth is being put to task. That is when you need to stand up and ask, if the other person can seek help, or if both the parties can go and seek professional help. And depending on whether the other person is cooperative, right, you can make better decisions.
What if the other partner or other side doesn't want a resolution?
You tell me, what should the person do?
There can be two options,
Mm-hmm.
and which is something that either I quit or I fight it out. But then again, there is the yardstick of what you were saying, right? Saying, how do I even decide it, and at what point of time do I recognize that, okay, these are things that are happening to me, that my opinion doesn't count. My self-respect doesn't even matter to this person or party.
Right. See, one of the ways you can approach it is, one, you need to fix a discussion time for this, because this is your life decision. This is a decision of whether I stay or whether I leave, because all my efforts have not paid, and I'm afraid that I'm going to lose out on the rest of my life if I'm just going to tag along. So the first thing is, decide on a discussion time. These are my concerns. So if there are two people, let us say if it's a couple, then have a discussion time with children, because it's a well-being that is questioned after all. So your decision can't just be from your well-being perspective, and no parent can take that either, right? The second is, have a third party. It could be an elderly person, it could be a professional who can help you. Have a third party who is listening to the whole story. Otherwise, you're going to have the conversation going in circles.
But the third party should be acceptable to both the parties.
Yes. And if it is not acceptable, like if the third party is a professional help, then, the third party can stand towards one person's side and then help them make decisions from their perspective. You tell me what is it that you want. Forget about everybody else. You tell me what is it that you want. And then you have that leverage to say, I think I want to leave. What is it that's stopping you? My child's future, or my financial security, or, I've lived like this for 25 years and now will it even make sense? Then probe deeper. Will it make sense if you stay?
Or will it make sense if you both are apart?
Yes.
And that, of course, can apply to even boardroom situations and
Yes.
the adjudicators or,
Yes.
agencies.
Yes.
Agencies that step in.
Yes.
No matter what, I think takeaways from the conversation this far that you and I have had is that the conflict, first of all, is not bad. Factor it into your relationships and then you're much better off than seeing it as a sort of a red flag.
Yes, because if you're going to use conflict as a parameter to measure if your relationships are healthy, then there are studies in Princeton University and other places where they say that conflict is a very important measure for discovering the health of the relationships. And conflict have been essential in healthy relationships. So if you're not having conflicts, if you're not fighting it out and both of them are giving silent treatment, then it's a matter of concern. Right?
Then just to go back to the points you brought up, then there is no growth. There's probably no breakthrough happening,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
One of the things that I did, Sunita, was to have a little poll amongst people in my social media community and otherwise, saying what are the questions that people have generally, or challenges that people are facing.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can, within our given time, attempt some short answers.
Short answers. Okay.
Yes.
I like this approach. Everybody wants short answers and
Yeah, and the therapist in you, therefore, has to become
cutting it down from
quizzer.
150 words to 36 words.
Try. And, free yourself of any conflict at this point of time. And
No, there's growth.
for sure. Some fight and some flee. Pointers for the escapist or the argumentative. Is it better to fight or flee?
Do what makes sense to you. Would you fight or flee because you have an idea, right? If you have this idea that, I don't want to be in a place of negativity and I feel like I'm cornered and I don't have the energy to go and fight. And that's why I want to walk away. If that makes sense to you, and if that's more important to you than the relationship, then you exactly know what you want to do. And if you are the person who is argumentative, who has more this approach like justice has to prevail, I need to know why this was not done when I had asked that, very clearly asked you to do this. I think, you need to first understand what is it that you want. Will you hold on to this idea even if you have nothing to gain out of this?
There are some relationships, and this is the second one which I'm bringing up, where, there is an inherent hierarchy. Let's say in a team, you have the project lead and you're someone who's a newbie. And she wants to be heard without raising her voice. She wants to get her point across because she feels this is important. How does she do that?
You cannot do that without conflict. If there is something that is bothering you inside, probably right now you might not see the ripple effect. But then just because you go out there and say, hey, this can be done like this, why are we continuing to do this like this? Then everybody probably might be like, yeah, we never thought of it. Let us do this.
So to answer this person's query, like you can put your point across without making it seem like a huge argument. So it is also the framing of that conflict or where I see the conflict, isn't it? Like, it might cost you your job. Come to think of it. Because there are certain, and especially in Indian context, I have seen in very rigid structures, it could be government offices, there is such a power imbalance, Sunita, as you and I know.
Yes.
That I want to put this across because I think it's in the overall benefit of the organization or the team. But you are so, powerful in your position that you may think of this as some sort of a dissent and demote you, or even you may find yourself out of the team. So to just bring it back, probably the phrasing of the solution to the conflict also is an important thing.
Vasanthi, I think truth need not be phrased. You search for your voice is when you know that, what I'm going to say is not going to be appreciated by everyone. And I cannot sleep without having to go and say this, break this news. And if you're worried about, okay, I'm going to stake my job in this and probably, my future promotions and all those things, I think you need to sit down and ask yourself, am I okay to work like this? Am I okay to just, go there and be part of the whole conversation saying, oh yeah, things never change and this is how it is. If you're okay, then so be it.
Yeah.
See, at the end of the day, you are your own judge. You decide the volume of your voice. So I don't think so we need a new phrase for truth. You can go and say the truth in the language that you know, exactly like the way you're feeling it.
It's a good point to wrap this conversation by asking you, therefore, as our segment Headstrong, that we leave people with an actual tool.
Yes.
Right? So what is that tool which will actually help people to turn conflict into something that transforms, into a tool of transformation?
Beautiful. So, Vasanthi, at the end of the day, what each one of us need to understand is this. All conflicts can boil down to the conflict of two different philosophies for life. There's one school of thought that says, if you're happy, I'm happy. The Asian countries, we subscribe to the collectivism philosophy. And then you have the other school of thought that says, if I'm only not happy, how will I keep you happy? And the individualism philosophy folks, they go by this school of thought. And the tricky part is when we try to figure out, which school of thought is better than the other. That is when we fundamentally become fanatics, who have this extreme views, and not just extreme views, but where I fundamentally believe that, my school of thought is the best school of thought, right? So if we can have this understanding that at the end of the day, life can be viewed in a million ways. And that is the biggest blessing of being a human being, being an earthling. So decide who you are, which approach seems natural to you, and then focus more on that, because that is where you will find your most authentic self, because that is the purpose of every conflict that life throws at you. It's an opportunity for you to discover who you are and what your priorities are, and that's exactly how the world needs you.
This clarity of the two tools that you have given us, this clarity that it gives is important. Because from there you can really find your path to resonate. Yeah, glad. I really hope that people are going through this actually use these tools. So until we meet the next time on another episode of this show, bye from here. Thank you for watching this episode of the Emotional First Aid Show. If you like what you heard, do subscribe and write in with your comments and suggestions. Thanks again for watching.